So Bernie Sanders' campaign has been taking a lot of issue with the mainstream media and how they cover his campaign and how they cover him and the way they kind of treat him as if he's a candidate that has no chance to win, and he's falling in the polls and stuff like that. So recently, they decided to call out the mainstream media, and they decided to say, that their coverage of him is unfair, and they're portraying him in a light that's completely inaccurate, and it's not in any basis of fact or anything. It's just based on whatever their anti-Bernie biases basically are. So I wanted to read an article here from The Hill where it discusses that very issue. The title of the article is Sanders' Campaign Vents Frustration with Media Polls. And the article is from, I believe, the 17th. Yeah. So let's check it out here. It says Senator Bernie Sanders' campaign aides are questioning the polls and venting frustration with the news media, arguing that a biased political press is writing him off or blackballing him from coverage of the 2020 Democratic presidential primary. Sanders is in second place or third place in many national and early state polls, but his campaign has struggled to overcome the emerging narrative that his moment has passed. After electrifying the liberal base as the lone serious challenger to Hillary Clinton in 2016, Sanders has at times been overshadowed in his second presidential run by Senators Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, and Kamala Harris, Democrat of California, who have generated buzz and excitement as they've risen in the polls. Sanders' campaign aides have taken notice, arguing that public opinion surveys don't capture their young, enthusiastic base of supporters or the new voters they say they're bringing into the fold. And as you guys know from if you watch my podcast, you've seen many, many times I say, don't always believe the polls. That doesn't mean you should completely, ignore them and act like they don't exist or anything like that. Just don't take everything that they say seriously in those numbers, because that stuff does not represent doesn't represent a lot of the supporters from different campaigns, especially populist campaigns, and especially campaigns that, the mainstream media doesn't approve of, because a lot of times they'll push polls or they'll survey essentially polls, or they'll survey people in their polls that are going to benefit it's going to kind of cater to the belief that whatever that narrative that media company or channel is putting out. So, for example, what happened in 2016 with Donald Trump winning, nobody saw that coming. But constantly, from pollsters like Nate Silver and all these other people, Huffington Post, and all these people were doing polls and said 90%, 95, 98% chance that Hillary's going to win, and 95% chance. But okay, maybe it's a 90% chance, and that was like on election day when the number was getting lower and lower and lower, and Hillary Clinton's chances were getting worse and worse, and they just kept ignoring it and just pretending like, her chances are getting less, but she's still going to win, don't worry. So people completely overlooked the possibility of Trump having a chance. And I think they're doing the same thing with Bernie Sanders too. So let's continue on here. In this part, they talk about how, or they basically push the narrative that Bernie Sanders isn't popular. And it says here, every time there is a story about how Bernie can't win, it fans the flames of our base, and we get more donations and more volunteers, said one Sanders campaign aide who is not authorized to speak on the record. We'll never be the favorites in the media, I get it. But when was the last time one of these pundits visited a field office or talked to a state director? The bottom line is we have 2 million donors who have bought stock in what we're trying to do. That's powerful. If the media doesn't want to tell that story, that's fine. It just means we have to out-hustle these other campaigns. That's a very good mentality right there. I love that. Instead of just, spinning these stories and just pretending like it's, just putting out some bullshit propaganda and platitudes, they're getting into the details of how they're the grassroots campaign, and they have that grassroots motivation and grassroots spirit, and they're going to use that to plow through all the other candidates and prove the mainstream media wrong, and all the polls wrong too. And so here the article profiles basically the Bernie haters who talked about Bernie being a greatest hits candidate, basically, quote unquote. So it says Sanders' critics say it's up to the candidate to reinvent himself in a way that makes him stand out. Some Democrats say he's been a one-note candidate, always pivoting off of the political debate of the day to return to the same anti-corporate message that he's honed over decades. He's almost like a greatest hits act, said one Democratic operative. Others say Sanders has failed to broaden his appeal beyond a core block of progressive voters. How's that possible? He's getting the support of people in the Rust Belt. He's trying to garner support in black communities, South Carolina, Alabama. He's going to places like West Virginia as well, which is much more like Rust Belt-ish. Going to the middle of the country, Iowa, Ohio, and stuff. He's definitely got the support of Michigan, Wisconsin, those, very high union, heavy union type states, which Wisconsin definitely is. Yeah, so this is bullshit. This doesn't make any fucking sense. These what is it, a Democratic operative? It's probably some sort of strategist or something. Those people are totally clueless. As I've said at the beginning, those people don't know shit. They don't know what they're talking about. They just talk out of their ass and give you some stupid explanation that doesn't make any sense. And I guess this is quoting another Democratic strategist. It says, the challenge here is getting news editors to see him as newsworthy when he's not moving in the race, said one Democratic strategist with close ties to the progressive movement. The reality is he's having a hard time expanding. It's completely okay for the media to point this out. The media is reporting on real movement in a dynamic race. This is not 2016 where he was the only other option. I doubt that's an actual progressive strategist. The progressive strategists don't say that kind of stuff. Now, yes, it's true that it's okay to report on, the moving of the polls. Nobody's saying that you shouldn't report on what's happening in polls and stuff like that. But it's the characterizations that the media invents, where they say like, oh my God, Bernie Sanders, like the same shit they're saying here. Bernie Sanders is saying the same thing as he was before, and he's within a bunch of candidates that are sounding just like him, and they're much younger. And oh my God, I can't count how many times I've heard this stupid narrative from these idiot pundits constantly saying this shit about how there's other candidates that are saying the same exact things as Bernie, so somehow that makes them more appealing. Like, where do people get this stuff from? It's just, you're just like, as if, that person is going to say something, and everybody is just going to fall all over themselves and be like, oh my God, Cory Booker sounds so wonderful, or Kamala Harris sounds so wonderful because she's younger and now she's sounding like Bernie, so that's perfect. As if we believe that candidate's going to maintain that narrative, or they're going to maintain that those talking points and go forward with that agenda. How do we know that they're not going to become centrist one time as soon as the fucking the general election comes by? When the general election comes by, they go right to the center again. They all of a sudden they become moderates after pretending to be fucking liberals and progressives in the primary. That's what every fucking Democrat does. The only person that hasn't done that, didn't do it in 2016. Well, he didn't make it to the general, but Bernie Sanders, when he was running in 2016, he was consistent throughout the entire primary, and he fought for those policies when leading up to the Democratic National Convention. He made sure that those policies were in the platform for the Democratic National Committee, and it made a huge difference. So don't tell me about all these other candidates that are in this race, and somehow because they sound like Bernie, that makes them just as appealing. That's bullshit. So continuing on here, it talks about how Bernie directly he gets called out by the media and about his rhetoric. It says, on Sunday's Meet the Press, NBC anchor Chuck Todd confronted Sanders with criticism that his 2020 campaign sounds exactly like his 2016 campaign. Oh my God, how dare he repeat the same things that he was repeating before. Sanders responded that he will change what he's saying when, quote, when the poor get richer and the rich get poorer, when all of our people have healthcare as a right, and when we are leading the world in the fight against climate change. That's so true. So what are you supposed to do? Just because he's saying the same things from 2016, all of a sudden that's we've talked about this before. We talked about this on the last episode when Marcus Militsis was going after Bernie too for the same stupid shit. What is he supposed to do? He's supposed to alter his opinions because we're in a new campaign now, because it's 3 years later or whatever, 4 years later, almost 4 years later. So and they claim that he has to evolve and shit. Like, what is he evolving from? He's the most progressive candidate on the fucking stage in whatever debate he's going to be in. He's going to be the most progressive there, and somehow he's supposed to quote evolve. So what is he evolving from? He's already the most progressive candidate. Everybody else is to his right. And they're the ones that are co-opting his message and pretending to be like him, yet somehow he's the one who has to change. No, those other candidates are the ones that have to change. They have to become like him, which they are doing, but somehow the pundits and idiot fucking hosts on MSNBC and CNN and people that write these articles, they don't see that as opportunistic. So when they change their narrative, all of a sudden that's a good thing, not realizing the fact that they're going to switch right back to being centrist when the general election happens, like I said before. So the Bernie campaign here talks about how that they're airing their grievances on exactly what's going on. This one is talking about Ari Rabin-Havt, who is the chief of staff for Bernie Sanders. It quotes him as saying, "There's an institutional bias in the media for something new, and the press is no longer interested in covering the proposals Sanders brought to the forefront in the 2016 campaign that have since become mainstream in the Democratic Party." Rabin-Havt highlighted the insidious instances in which the media wrote up polls that showed Sanders firmly in second place, but the headlines and the leads of the stories focused instead on Harris and Warren rising into third or fourth place. Yeah, I remember that. I saw a couple of articles, I think it was from Politico or something, where they're talking about, Warren and Harris have risen and Biden is still in the lead. So Biden and Harris and Warren are in third and fourth place, and Biden is still in the lead. But then they don't even mention the person that's in second place. Who is that? It's Bernie Sanders. Continuing on here, it says, and he suggested that the top levels of the political press don't understand Sanders' appeal because they're disconnected from ordinary Americans. Quoting Rabin-Havt again here, it says, the elite media, the media that's at the top, the cable nets, the lead editors, the reporters, they tend to live in Washington, D.C. or New York, Rabin-Havt said. They tend to be upper middle class or wealthy. They work for companies worth billions of dollars, so on TV, you have millionaires paid by billionaires to present information. That's very true. So they're totally disconnected and out of touch, basically. So this is kind of a breakdown of how, like I said before, the mainstream media is underestimating Bernie, just like they did Trump in 2016. It says Sanders' allies argue that in 2016, pollsters routinely underestimated his base of support, referring to Bernie, and failed to account for young or new voters who supported him. They say they have an unparalleled network of volunteers and point to the fact that they've raised more money than any other candidate in the first 2 quarters of the year from about 2 million individual small dollar donors. In Iowa, for instance, where Sanders outperformed expectations in 2016, his campaign has carefully built up a massive turnout operation aimed at turning non-voters into highly motivated caucus goers. And this next part's quoting Ro Khanna, who is the co-chair of Bernie's campaign, and he's talking about the trending of the different trends of the polls. It says, I think the polling probably underestimates his support because last caucus, what happened is he exceeded the polls. Representative Ro Khanna, Democrat of California, a co-chair of Sanders' campaign, said there were about 10,000 to 12,000 people who showed up the day of the caucus who registered as Democrats to vote. Khanna said that Sanders' support is strongest in Iowa, the first in the nation caucus state, and California, which will vote on Super Tuesday. Both states will be critical in determining the Democratic nominee. I think his support in Iowa is very strong, very, very strong. Khanna said he's got one of the best ground teams. I was all over the state, and he's got numerous volunteers showing up to help canvass and call this early. Yeah, I think that's definitely something that the media is underestimating for sure, his ground game, his grassroots ground game. And then here, there's another pollster claiming, as the mainstream media typically does, that Bernie supporters might prefer other candidates in 2020 compared to 2016. It says, but Monmouth University pollster Patrick Murray said he has come across a significant chunk of 2016 Sanders supporters who are giving the other candidates a serious look. Murray agreed that pollsters don't know what the 2020 electorate will look like and that it's possible new voters will propel Sanders to victory. But he said surveys showing Harris and Warren on the rise and cutting into Sanders' support are an accurate reflection of the state of the race, at least at this early stage when support for all the candidates is soft. We don't know who will show up. The polls are not clear on what the electorate will look like, Murray said, but the overall trend of where the different candidates are moving is real. There are Sanders voters from 2016 who are looking seriously at other candidates. And that's why his support isn't where it was last time. Some might not go back to him because of the plethora of candidates to choose from. So I already mentioned this before. They're using that same narrative about how just because there's more candidates to choose from, all of a sudden that means that they're going to go to all those other candidates, even though those candidates don't have the same agenda as Bernie Sanders. Just because they sound like Bernie Sanders doesn't mean they're going to go all of a sudden, go in favor of the candidate that is younger or is a person of color or young, whatever, gay, like Pete Buttigieg is. Yeah, that narrative doesn't exist. So these people are like Ro said, Rabin-Havt said, these people are, they're totally out of touch. They don't know anything about Bernie voters. They don't know how we think. They don't know anything about progressives and what our agenda truly stands for. Now they know what we believe in, but they don't know about how we won't just settle for any other, any candidate that's out there. We want the candidate that's going to be an actual progressive and the one that we know is going to be Donald Trump. So Joe Biden is not going to be Donald Trump. Kamala Harris is not going to be Donald Trump. Elizabeth Warren is not going to be Donald Trump. Now, obviously, their policies are better, but not really so much with Biden, but I mean, like, let's say Elizabeth Warren, yeah, her policies are much, much better than what Donald Trump has what Donald Trump is offering. But that doesn't mean that she's going to win, because a lot of people are going to look at Donald Trump and they're going to see that, the way he talks and the way he puts out his rhetoric and, spews his propaganda, people are going to fall for it a hell of a lot more than somebody like Elizabeth Warren, who I believe doesn't connect with the majority of regular voters out there. And I think honestly they would probably look at Elizabeth Warren as a little bit of an elitist, and people don't like voting for elitist candidates. They don't like that. And that was very evident for example, in 2004, when John Kerry ran against George W. Bush. And everybody saw George W. Bush as like that typical everyday man, everyman, and even though he wasn't, but they saw him as like that typical everyman who, you can sit down and have a beer with, you can hang out with, and you can go, I don't know, pick up some brush in his fucking cabin or something and go fishing and, go horseback riding and shit like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, compared to John Kerry, who speaks French and he's fucking, I don't know, skiing in the Alps and shit like that. It's like, that's not stuff that people relate to. And that's unfortunately, like with somebody like, for example, Elizabeth Warren, she is a former Harvard law professor. Now, to be fair, Barack Obama, he obviously became president, and he was a law professor, and he was a constitutional lawyer and all that stuff. But he had much more of an inspiring message, and he had a message that connected to people that were tired of George W. Bush. People aren't tired of Donald Trump. People are angry at Donald Trump, but then on the other hand, people are also very excited for Donald Trump. So his supporters are very excited for Donald Trump. The more he gets attacked, the more they back him. The more the more scandals there are out there, the more people that hate him. So it's a battle of emotions. That's how it is with Donald Trump and his supporters. And if you want to get somebody in there who is not going to be able to connect on that same emotional level, but also obviously pushing the policies, then you're not going to get by him. And I believe that somebody like Bernie Sanders, regardless of whatever emotional support that he has from his supporters, which I don't think is much. But let's just say if, he has some, that's good. But majority of his support comes from the fact that he has people backing him for his policies. And it doesn't matter what kind of emotional support he has. So he can have people, loving him and thinking he's a rock star. But at the end of the day, it's important to know that people trust him to be who he is and to be a real person and to relate to regular people. Donald Trump, people may think he relates to regular people based on the way he doesn't act presidential, and he's just kind of like shooting from the hip and sounding very just, sounding like he's just, talking, talking, on the kind of on the go, just saying whatever is on his mind. But at the end of the day, they know that he doesn't really give a shit about anybody but himself, and he loves to get attention through his tweeting and through his, fucking gaslighting of progressives and talking about Medicare for none or whatever the hell he was talking about, as covered in the last segment. So just putting out fucking bullshit propaganda, waging wars. He's not ending the wars that he claimed he wanted to end. So Trump he's a fucking charlatan, as everybody knows, and majority of people don't see that in Bernie Sanders. They see that in Elizabeth Warren. Well, I think they probably see it less in Elizabeth Warren than any other non-Bernie candidate. But like somebody like Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Pete Buttigieg, like these people are not like no regular person is inspired by these people. The only thing they like about them is that they're young. That's it. Joe Biden is just a fucking dinosaur because not only is he old, but his ideas are old. And whereas Bernie Sanders' ideas are new, but he's old. But it doesn't matter because people still see Bernie as this, young grandpa, essentially, right? He's a grandpa, but he's still a young grandpa because he doesn't have that same stupid agenda where he's pushing ideas that people don't want. He's pushing the idea, he's pushing the agenda that people are actually advocating for. And that's why we like him.